Greetings and salutations. Welcome. This is going to be another breakdown. I am joined today by my good friends. The queen of the numinous, Miss Niish, is with us today. And from north of the border in Canada, a man of many talents, an artist and a welder, my friend Michael Wachter joins us as well. This will be our third breakdown. Today, we are going to be going over the 2014 BBC show Intruders. And this was not a show I had actually heard of before. So when Nish told me about this, I was kind of excited to jump into this. And I'm just going to go ahead and give you a little bit of let me go back. So Intruders is essentially it's a kind of a crime story. It involves an ex-cop who's living in Seattle as a writer, and this really touches on reincarnation and people that are able to incarnate again and again in different bodies. And they have a society that they're part of, a secret society, if you will, called, well, in the show, it's Qui Reverte. And I'm going to be going over the book as well, because I realized after I started watching this show that this is actually made from a book. And I'm glad that I read the book, because the book fills in so many things that the show kind of leaves out. But before I get into that, I'm going to kick it over to Nish and let her just talk about what inspired her to want to break this show down in the first place. Nish?
Thank you, gentlemen. It's great to be back with the two of you. I really had a hope that this could happen with you two, and it's happening. So the band's back together for this, and I think it's seminal. I think it's important. I think it's more important than it was in 2014. We're confronted with the idea of everything that is coming forward with this narrative. So in the beginning, there was death. And when we look across the board at religions, when we look across the board at folk practices, when we start digging into what we're doing here, why we're doing here, what time is it, when are we, all these esoteric philosophical queries that are in and amongst people throughout the eras, the eons, conceptually, but there is a history, at least verbally, and then there's a history given to glyphs and oral tradition through many cultures. In fact, I believe almost all cultures, one way or another, this type of material works its way into that are thinking from a higher mind, and that's above the struggle level. This is when you get into a space where you are able to think about things, think about what you're doing here. Have you been here before? What's the nature of deja vu? What's the nature of thinking backwards, memories, falling into sentimentality? And when we're talking about specific ideas of immortality, of being or reaching for the eternal through the human hand, through these temples or biosuits that we use in this materialistic realm, in this hardcore intense realm that we're in right now, and all the things that we're experiencing with it, and looking out and wondering, why are we here? What is the nature of all this nasty stuff and everything that goes along with all that? That gives us contrast. The contrast is a gateway into questioning more. And for those that seek, we start to look deeper into the magical ideas of deja vu, and then if you trace that back, the idea of I've been here before, what does that lead to? Well, it starts to lead to your own personal memories in your own personal life. And sometimes when you revisit or re inhabit these memories of yours, they fall apart. Something else starts to rush to the surface, or sometimes it's a slow excavation. But they tend to, for real seekers, not be what we thought they were. So for the deep woo, there's the whole idea of cover memories and cover iterations. And this brings us into the secret society aspect of it and control grids. Who's controlling whom? And what is the nature of the control? What is going on with all this? Some religions have backed this up with a trajectory for very special ones that are in there. So if we look back at, say, the Egyptians and the coffin rituals, the coffin spells, or going forth by day, the many names that go on with this particular idea of reincarnation, which at this point in the early days of that were for the pharaoh and the high priesthood and special people, special bloodlines, if you will. And we have the birth of the idea of continuity within bloodlines. Now, it goes back further, and we could certainly talk to Sumer and talk of Sumer and go back into other stuff, but we have solid evidence here and with the Egyptians, and it's just easy because everyone's really aware of that. And so there is an idea of bloodline and moving through the bloodline, like one would get on a canoe and move down a river. This is significant when we're thinking about our continuity in life. Who am I now? And when you start asking that question and you start to look at the things you're attracted to, you start getting somewhere. Why am I attracted to this or that? And when you start to analyze the things you're attracted to and you strip them from the modern pop culture, a lot of the stuff that's around us, that surrounds us, has long legs into that which we consider the past, into something behind us. So we can loop fashion styles in and out through our known history of embroideries and paintings and cave petroglyphs, all this. We can see how, say, a toga has made its way all the way up into current fashion. You still have the same form. You still have the same cut. It just gets finessed. Fashion loops. Everything else loops. Causality loops. And this is no different when we start talking about the idea of souls, of beings moving through bloodlines on that canoe, down the bloodline stream into the collective ocean of bloodlines. And it looks like some folks in the ancient world figured out how to do reiterations, revisitations through bloodline. And then they've expanded it out further than that. But when we start looking at bloodline, it's good to look at some of the scholarly work out there. So like I said, if you start breaking down the coffin spells, you start looking at the old stories, then you come into modern times and you start looking at some of the scholarship that's gone on from, say, like Peter, oh Lord, what's his name? Peter Mark Adams. He wrote The Game of Saturn. And this was his scholarly breakdown into a very provocative tarot called the the Solabrusca Tarocchi. And this is more than a tarot or a tarocchi. This is a set of symbols. This is a pathway. These are tickers to show one that there is some sort of continuity of revisiting through your bloodline. So somebody way back when could have been blood hopping all the way up into this point. Now we have plenty of movies in the realm, and one that I love that received a lot of hate from the hoodoo crowd, but I love it. I still see it as valuable and entertaining, was a Skeleton Key. We get this idea. And in these tellings of how does one jump from body to body to body, moving forward in apparent time, we start to see similar things, similar rituals, similar threads that pull it all together. There are rituals within established religions, like the Mormons have their baptism of the dead. Now, if you scratch the surface on that, you're looking at the same thing. And you can go down that wonderful rabbit hole because it's very fruitful, but it is only the new child on the scene because, like I said, this is old school. It brings to mind conceptually, what are we really? And what is this life? As far as, if I have been moving through time, and if death itself is a mind wipe, is a cover story to clear me of the process of reincarnation in the general sense, what's possible if I move through or somehow come through consciously with cognitive memory of where I was before? Now, we can strip this of any secret society malarkey. We can take away the magic spell aspect of it and just ponder that idea. If you had memory, full capacity of where you've been, how would that change you now? What would that do for you? It does appear that that's a danger to the system, and we get back to the bloodlines. Most of these bloodlines are ruling class bloodlines that are here creating the construct that we live in and within. And within this construct, it's obvious that we are enslaved or indentured here, because you can't just shed your husk of everything. You can, and you can be unhomed, as they say, but you are still in the system. And I do believe that there are people that have been able to get out, but that's part of the puzzle. And that's part of why we're doing this. This becomes a life's work if you're not born into it, if you're not in the club or the council of nine. This also opens the door to what else could be surfing our bloodlines, what else could be taking our vessels that came forth through the holy portal of the Zeitgoat Spark, that were absolutely tailor-made for us in our energetics personally to function and navigate through this realm. There's a lot going on here, and this series to me was very important. I knew it then as I know it now, and revisiting it has only strengthened this idea, because there's a purity in this particular telling, both the book and the series, that I enjoyed. It could be verbose, yes. It could be slow moving for some, certainly. But ultimately, this is a big telling of what's going on and what can go on. And it gives more than others telling this story. And I think that's why, because it had been planned to have more seasons, and it was successful. It's gained a cult following now, and it's interesting to see some of these actors really bloom into other interesting roles. But suffice it to say, this is important. We get information out of this that's important. And if we start stripping away some of the language, we see it. If we start looking at the numbers, we start to see it. And we see how it's connected, interconnected, interwoven with everything else. And it's certainly a nice third breakdown for Michael Wachter, Eric Peterson, and I to embark on. And so, with that, I just want to also add, in the end, there is no end, as is stated. And this is something that is liberating. This, to me, is a bit of hope in what is a hopeless world. I know there are those out there that want the nothingness. And I think you can have the nothingness because we look around and there are people that choose nothingness every day, all day long. We all see them, dead eyes. We see them. We see them out there. But for those of us with the spark, with the lust for life, we are shining bright. And so this is why I'm excited to break this down with you all. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nish. Several things came to mind as I was listening to you talk. And when you speak about scholarly work, there is scholarly work out there discussing, for instance, the practice of the ancient Tibetan monks and lamas, how they choose the next lama, the building of the rainbow body in their cosmology, which is essentially building up the energetic body to survive death and with memory, to reincarnate again. There's even the conception that within the Tibetan tradition, that the Skywalkers, that are the reincarnation of the god Apollo, and they may not call him Apollo, but there's a book that I read by an occult author who really goes into this. And the other thing that it made me think of was the Rosicrucian practice of the solar body. You see this in all of the magical traditions. There's different language, but they're all talking about the same thing, which is surviving the second death, where with the soul and memory intact, to be able to navigate the afterlife and to come back again, to incarnate again with full memory of who you are, so that you really do get a head start in the game when you come here. If you had to forget everything and start all over again as an infant, it really levels the playing field. But if you have the advantage to come back with full memory, especially having done that work of all of the past lives through the bloodlines, having access to all of that knowledge and that wisdom, then you really do come here and you're able to live a life of purpose, whatever that purpose is for you. And when you spoke about people living in nothingness, I really feel like it's living a life without purpose, without understanding your reason for being here in this place, here at this time. And I definitely think a lot of these elements are touched on in the show Intruders, and definitely in the book itself. Michael, did you have any thoughts on reincarnation before we kind of jump into the meat of this show?
Yeah, sure. Well, good to be here with you two again, and thanks for having me. This is a pretty cool series. I really enjoyed the book, actually more than the show, but I really did like the show as well. So lots of really good stuff here. And reincarnation. Well, I'm happy to forget, I don't want to be coming in remembering everything. It seems like a bit of a burden to bear for me. And the idea of escape, I don't know, I've gone through stages with this. But I don't think, like, what are you escaping from? And when you escape, how do you know you have escaped to the real world? Because you can escape to another, say, simulation if this isn't the real. So when does it stop? And then you just keep going around. That's what I think, what goes around comes around. You keep on riding that wheel. And the trick would be to just get off the wheel. So in my mind, I would not, I don't think, I think it is a burden that they bear on themselves, and it's wouldn't be in my interest to keep coming back with memories of everything. That could haunt you as well. And yeah, you might have a purpose, but at what cost? So reincarnation, who knows? I mean, I have memories of something else or another life, but that's could be, dreams or parts of the collective unconscious that are, readily accessible to all of us. We may all be the same thing, parts of the same thing. So to me, it doesn't really matter if we, as individuals, come back, because if our memory is wiped, then we are a new individual. We might still have that collective memory somewhere, but it's eternal. It's you could keep coming back, having new lives, and all of them will integrate at some point. I see us all as like the gods of reality, consciousness itself. So I don't have a grim view of reality. I think it's a magical experience, and I love the wonder and the evil, the fight against evil and good. But I don't. I think they're the two sides of the same coin. So I don't know. I'll leave you with that, and then we can continue forward with this.
I
Well,
want to
sir,
add one thing to that.
sure, go
So
ahead.
is Michael saying that this popped in and it came from, I think, the book, but you could correct me. For sure the series. So at some point, one of the guys says Rose, about Rose. Rose is a label for a state of mind, because he kept asking, where's my Amy? Who's Rose? And the idea of a label for a state of mind as a personality, a person. Michael, a label for a
Yeah.
state of mind. I love that. And it speaks a little bit to what you were just saying there, and the beauty of your perspective, which gives us contrast within this. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. And it does bring up some ideas I've had. And I do think so. We can go back to the Dalai Lama as well. And in this series, they have an item which the previous version of the self died looking at, or was the last thing they saw. It was kind of the idea. And the Dalai Lama had toys that were his, right? That were his prized possessions that were given to the new Dalai Lama. And if they were taken by that Dalai Lama, then that was a sign that he was reincarnated into that body. Now, and we can, like, I'll just keep brainwashing and all that out of this. And, but you can take that personality of that previous Dalai Lama, everything that he knew, and teach that life to someone that's young and impressionable. And part of that life would inhabit that individual. They would take on parts of that personality and that mission. So in a way, are they really that consciousness, or is it all one consciousness and that's been implanted and now that is part of their consciousness? It's an interesting question.
What's something that I've I've certainly thought a lot about when it comes to this. If you were to remember all of your past lives and all of your past iterations, would you cease to be the unique individual that you find yourself at the present moment? Or is it more about, I guess, when I'm thinking of recapitulation with Castaneda, integrating certain memories in the sense of extracting the knowledge or the wisdom and not necessarily absorbing the entire personality, where I'm playing the character of Eric in this iteration, but that doesn't mean that I need to remain Eric for all time, that I want to take from Eric and extrapolate from this experience the knowledge and wisdom that I'm gaining. And I think, in a sense, that's what is being hinted at in the show and in the book about, bringing forward not just a personality, but also memories and wisdom. And not everybody is successful at this, as we see with the character of Marcus, and we'll get into that. But you actually said, what goes around comes around, which is funny because that's what one of the characters says in the show as their tagline, which was Marcus. So anyway, I think we should just go ahead and get going with this. And let me see if I can get this slide moving forward. It doesn't seem to be wanting to work. So, well, basically the show begins in Seattle with a retired or police officer, an ex-police officer named Jack Whalen. And he has now become an author who has written a fairly successful book. And in the show, it doesn't really tell you what the book was about. In the book, we get a little bit more information, and it was actually just a book of photographs that he took of different crime scene locations and sort of the feel and the vibe that he experienced at those locations. And so he is married to a woman named Amy, and seemingly life is good for him, living in a nice place in a small little town just east, I think, of Seattle, up in the mountains. And something begins to happen. Amy is gone on a trip to Seattle, and he can't get a hold of her. And this begins his detective mind starts to set in. And he begins to worry that something is happening. Maybe she's having an affair. He's trying very hard not to let his mind run away with all of these wild ideas. And so it soon, though, begins this quest to figure out what's going on, because as Amy doesn't return his calls, he starts recalling her past behavior and how certain things that she had done in more recent times seem odd to him. So this sort of begins this quest. And I really want to get these slides working here, and I'm having
I want you to as well. You did such work on them.
I'm having the hardest time. Every time I hit a button, it's not doing anything. Oh, here we go.
There we go.
Nice.
Yay. All right. There we go. Okay. So it's actually based on the book by Michael Marshall Smith, and which came out in 2007. He is an English author who was, interestingly enough, was a comedic writer and actor, and went to a very prestigious boys' school, and was part of an elite sort of acting troupe in England. So he wrote this book, which is really more of like an American kind of detective story, but more of a metaphysical detective story. And we start out with Jack, the former LAPD detective, and he gets involved with the Qui Reverti conspiracy. Now, the Qui Reverti is the name that the show creators gave to this group of people who are reincarnating over and over again. In the book, Qui Reverte is never mentioned. This is a made-up name that the creators of the show came up with. And his wife's soul is lost to what they're calling an intruder named Rose. So Amy, his wife, or Rose Gilchrist, is really the first mention we get of the intruder. Actually, in the show, there's some scenes of a girl, a young girl in high school, that commits suicide in a bathtub. And it's implied that she also is trying to fight this intruder, but we don't really get an explanation of why she would kill herself. And then that's a flashback scene. And then it skips forward. So Amy, Jack's wife, starts acting strange. And he comes to find out that she is inhabited by this intruder named Rose, who had died and has come back into Amy's body. Then there's Gary Fisher, who is a lawyer who is involved in a legal sense with some of the members of Qui Reverte. And he is a friend of Jack's from back in high school. Now, this gets into something interesting. There's sort of a side plot in the show and in the book involving a machine that you really don't get a lot of explanation on what the machine looks like, but we do get some hint about what it could do. And I'll get to that. But Gary kind of shows up as Jack is noticing changes in Amy. Gary just synchronistically shows up and begins to tell him that he has some information about his wife. And he tells him that there's some documents that show that she is the owner of a building somewhere in Seattle, and it's part of this organization and group of people. And then you have Richard Shepard, and the Qui Reverte actually employ several armed men who are referred to as shepherds, and they kind of do the dirty work for this secret society by killing and silencing anybody that they deem a threat to exposing what they're doing. And he is also a guy who's taken a bribe from one of the former members of this group named Marcus Fox, who is a serial killer and a pedophile. And Marcus pays him over $1 million for Shepard to bring him back into someone's body, because the Qui Reverte had grown tired of Marcus and what he was choosing to do with all of his second chances. And because he had been killing people, they decided that they were going to kill him and not allow him to come back. But Shepard brings him back for $1 million. And then, of course, we have Madison, which is a 9-year-old girl played by Millie Bobby Brown. And she is the body that Shepard, and see, this is where it gets kind of hard to understand. One thing that's never explained in either the show or the book is how the members of Qui Reverte know where a returning soul is going to incarnate, who they're going to incarnate into. That's never really explained, but they just seem to know who to look for. So, and there was some implication that possibly Shepard made the decision about who to bring Marcus back into, that he brought him into the body of a 9-year-old girl as sort of a sick joke, because he understood that Marcus was a pedophile and a murderer, and what better way to bring him back but to keep him in line than to bring him back in the body of a 9-year-old girl. So Millie Bobby Brown plays a very, very creepy pedophile serial killer in her 9-year-old girl body. So these are kind of the main cast of characters that we have. And when I read the book fills in so many blanks than the show did. And I know that Niish, Michael, you guys said that you really liked this show. I enjoyed the show, but it seemed very cheesy to me. A lot of things that they put in the show were a bit over the top. And when you compare it to the book, it seems like the directors purposely changed things and added things that changed the overall feel of the story itself. And they selectively leave things out that actually enrich the story much more. And I'm not sure why they did that. I can only really speculate on it. But when we're looking at the character of Marcus Fox in the show, of course, he's a pedophile serial killer in both the show and the book. But in the show, he appears in multiple flashbacks, and there's an older man that plays this character. And there are scenes depicting his victims being found in his house in Seattle under his floorboards, bound in a very specific way. The Seattle detective, there's another detective on the Seattle PD that Jack is kind of working with as he investigates the mystery of his wife. And he's getting involved and getting in trouble and sort of having this run-in with the same detective. So in the show, the detective was actually the lead on the case of Marcus Fox, and he's the one that finds the bodies in Marcus's house. But Marcus escapes his capture. The thing about the binding I thought was strange. When I first watched the show, I hadn't read the book yet. So they make a big deal in the show about the way that his victims are bound is also part of this qui reverti ritual that appears in this notebook that each member gets when they incarnate. They give them a notebook for them to familiarize themselves with the group and the beliefs to sort of bring back that memory. And in the body of Madison, Marcus's notebook has the pictures of that binding.
I just want to throw something in here.
Sure.
When you find the bodies, or when they find the bodies in Marcus's house, you can notice that they are bound this way, which is a part of the qui reverti ritual, and they have their items with them. So they could potentially be brought back into other bodies. So it's curious that this could be other individuals that were used, or else it's just senseless murders that he found, that in case he wanted to bring them back and do something to them again, he could. But it's interesting, and I'm not sure exactly what to make of it. But they did also say that he had started to lose his mind as well, and I don't think he was always like that. So, and it could be from coming back too many times was kind of what I was picking up from that.
Yeah,
Also, I'd like to ping in as well, if I may.
Sure.
Short one. Qui reverti, reverti in Latin is to return, and qui's a pronoun in French. And in the book, they called them revisitors. And so I think that's something to consider. It caught my eye immediately just from seeing the series first, the reverti part. I was like, oh, okay, to return, because I love Latin.
Yeah.
And the binding of the bodies, again, this goes back to old traditions in Peru, in Egypt, of course. We see the body binding and all this. And this was another thing I found deeply significant in this particular narrative, how one prepares the body for rebirth. And if you look how they did it, it's very, well, it looks like a fetus. They're in the fetal position. So I'll give the floor back.
Well, certainly the binding of the bodies and the inclusion of that in the show, I think, was probably a good move by the writers, because in the book, they don't actually, well, I'll get to that in the book, but they don't actually mention binding whatsoever in the book. So the fact that they brought that into the story, I think, was a benefit in adding that in, right? It helped in the story a bit, because I think the way that the author handled that was just sort of lacking. But yes, the fact that Marcus had come back so often, and it was implied that he was starting to lose his mind, that this is something that could happen to any of them. And I think you start to see this with Rose as well in the show, with her almost obsession with bringing back a person that she had been in love with in her previous life, but that was not a member of this society. And she was continuing to go ahead with this. This was actually the jazz artist Bix Beiderbecke. And in the show, they actually have a character. It's an Asian man that they are saying is Bix, and she has his object and gives him his book, but he is having trouble coming through in this body because when he died, he had alcohol problems and he had some deep-seated issues, and those were all coming back out in the body of the Asian man he was inhabiting. And it was very, very difficult for him, probably given that he had never done this before and that these people are well practiced at it. So, it does speak to that the more you come back, it kind of, you run the risk of eroding your sense of right and wrong, what is real, what is not, what you're capable of, what you should or shouldn't do. And we see that with Marcus. He just seems like he enjoys what he's doing. And he even talks about killing young girls back in Mozart's time. So he's been at this a while. We don't know how old he actually is. They don't really ever get into that. But in the show, the 9 decide that he needs to go. So they encase him behind a brick wall in the underground layer of the building in Seattle, which they own. And Madison, as Marcus, tries to break this wall down when she gets into the building to find the body of Marcus that's encased behind there. And Jack, the detective, actually ends up helping her. In the show, Marcus kind of takes full control of Madison during most of the show. And this is where you get Millie Bobby Brown acting really, really creepy, committing multiple murders. Madison, as Marcus, returns to Marcus's old house and then murders the guy that's living there. And Marcus's trigger seems to be a sand dollar. And he is defeated by Madison in her mental space in a sort of mountainous lake setting after she is shot and hits her head. And in the show, Jack saves her at the last minute from being fatally shot, but she is wounded and she hits her head. And it's not really said in the show that the head trauma is what caused Marcus to vanish from the consciousness, but that, it was her battling with him in this mental space. So the show really played up her abilities, even as a 9-year-old child, to defeat this guy in this mental space that she was in. Now, in the book, almost none of the things that I listed above actually occurred. Marcus is only mentioned in the book, but there are never any real flashbacks of his interactions with the other characters. The bodies of his victims were actually never found by the police, and they were never bound. They were placed in body bags in the underground layer of the Nine's building. And Marcus himself was also in a body bag in that same location. Madison, throughout the book, is actually struggling with the Marcus consciousness trying to come through and take over. And the author does a good job of giving you her internal thoughts and how she's processing what's happening to her, which isn't really done very well in the show and isn't reflected in the show. So I think that the book really helps you understand how a 9-year-old girl is coping with being almost overtaken by this stronger consciousness. And the binding, obviously, we talked about that, wasn't mentioned. And the killings that he did were never really said to be known about outside the Qui Reverti. Madison never goes to Marcus's old house. She doesn't kill the man that was living there. In fact, Marcus's old house is never even brought up in the book. The sand dollar really seems to only have relevance to Madison and not to Marcus. We don't know why the sand dollar kind of triggers Marcus. And Marcus is said to be gone after Gary Fisher saves Madison. So Gary Fisher actually saves Madison in the book, not Jack. In the show, and actually I'm going to go to another slide, because Gary Fisher and the Marcus character were kind of the two that I've focused on with the discrepancies, which I thought were interesting, but also changed the story for me. Gary Fisher, the friend of Jack, the lawyer, in the show, he's played by a Black actor, and he is an old high school friend of Jack's. He has this infant daughter who he believes is, quote unquote, possessed by the returned soul of the girl from high school who had committed suicide in the bathtub. He becomes increasingly unhinged as the show progresses and lies to Jack about his full involvement. He's shown to have a bunch of paperwork scattered all over his hotel room, like he's this nutty conspiracy theorist. He's staying in the same hotel as the Amy Rose character, right across the hall from her, and she's in room 909. He takes all this paperwork and he puts it into these paper files, and he tapes that to his body, and he jumps off the building of the Quai Verde, committing suicide in the hopes that the police will read his crazy folder of evidence and solve the mystery, which they never do. He's married, but has been living in Seattle and was fired from his job and is estranged from his family. In the show, his daughter is still alive, and still seemingly he thinks she's possessed by this soul of this dead girl from high school. And he's kind of presented as being like this unhinged Looney Tune, and he dies a crazy coward in the show. But in the book, never was explicitly described his race, although the author does describe the different races of characters in the book. And it's sort of implied that Gary is white, like Jack. So I thought it was interesting that they made the character Black in the show. And then, as you're going to see, they just completely changed his whole story arc. There is a flashback scene of Gary and Jack in the book talking. They used to be on the same track team together. And Jack says something to Gary in the book when they're teenagers that really sticks with Gary, which is one of the reasons he actually reaches out to Jack and when he finds himself in this current situation that he's in. The girl who committed suicide actually deeply affected Gary in the book, but it wasn't actually his girlfriend. And they don't really go into how much that actually affected him in the show as much as they do in the book. So you really don't have the sense of why Gary is acting the way he's acting in the show, which is why he comes across as a little unhinged and crazy. Gary has a daughter, and he in the book, and he does believe she was possessed by this dead girl's soul, but it's only because the daughter actually dies in the tub in very much the same way that this girl died. And Gary is not staying at the same hotel that Amy or Rose is at. In fact, I don't remember, but I don't think they actually said that Amy/Rose was staying at a hotel at all in the book. And he gathers all of his documentation and ideas, and he puts it into a computer file on a thumb drive, which he gives to Jack, not the police, because all of the files, and in the book, you actually get to read what the files said, because it was meant for Jack, and it kind of explains why Gary was doing this, what motivated him to get involved in this. The contents, yeah, they are related in the book and provide much needed context for the plot, which is important. Gary actually saves Jack from the fire in the building towards the end of the show and pulls him out. And Jack gets shot in the shoulder by Shepard as they're going after Madison, because Shepard is trying to kill Marcus, who's in the body of Madison. And Jack is trying to save the girl, but he gets shot in the shoulder. So Gary drags him out along with another guy. And then Gary is the one that jumps in front of Shepard's bullet before it kills Madison. And he takes the bullet and dies a hero, saving her. And that's when Marcus kind of leaves her body. So it was strange that they took this character in the book who, you know, was very coherent. He did lie. He was a little sketchy, but he had his reasons and you understood them. And he died a hero, saving Madison from being killed by Shepard. And in the show, he commits suicide and jumps off a building with a bunch of files. It just made no sense. And so I didn't really know why the directors would do this. It was strange. The third character that I thought was interesting how they changed him was the character of Oz. Oz was in the show, Oz was a pirate radio host who he was like a conspiracy radio host driving around in his RV to avoid detection so he could broadcast his pirate radio about Bill Anderson, who was a guy who'd created this machine that would allow you to see ghosts or the souls of those people who were inhabiting other people's bodies. And Oz felt like people were after him. They portrayed him in the show as a paranoid conspiracy theorist nut job. He lived in a trailer park. All of the usual tropes about conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorist people were embodied in Oz in the show. But here's a passage from the book that actually shows you that the author wanted to portray Oz as the opposite of that. And he said there were countless groups interested in the underbelly, in finding the hidden truths. JFK obsessives who met once a month to pore over autopsy shots, online 9/11 nuts with their trajectory modeling software, Priory of Sion wannabes, Holocaust revisionists, circle jerks for everything that might or might not ever have been true. Jones's people sounded very different, or Oz would not have agreed to make contact in the first place. A tight, focused group of men and women who studied the facts without previous agenda and who met in secret, who weren't too close to one particular issue to miss a glimpse of the whole. This was what Oz needed, people with rigor. So the character in the book was actually not a conspiracy theorist. He simply understood that there was a secret group that was working to undermine Bill Anderson's research into a machine that would allow people to see spirits. In the show, they made him out to just be this kooky guy, and he gets killed by Shepard in the show by getting shot with his own gun in his trailer. In the book, he doesn't live in a trailer. He's actually on the run. He's living in a motel room temporarily, and Shepard comes to his hotel after following him from their meeting, and he ends up pushing him and he hits his head and dies. Now, I don't know why the writers and the director of the show decided to go a different way, but again, this is why the show started to look cheesy to me, because they were using a lot of these old tropes and it just seemed too obvious to me, and they were changing the characters themselves in a way that really sort of betrayed the characters that the author had come up with. And did you guys see a lot of this stuff?
I did.
Yeah.
And I one of the things for me when looking at collective pop culture narrative, so both of these things conceptually are pop culture, the book and the series, but turning Oz into the stereotypical guy in the trailer is almost expected because they want that image still out there. The reality of actually being on the run really is in the book, really sets down the deep danger that one can find themselves in when actually getting over the target. But also, I just want to do a kudos to the writer of the book and to those in the show for calling him Oz and bringing in that archetype at this point as a collective egregore for who's in control and what's in control and the puppet master and all that. So I thought that was a very significant um, name given in context to this whole thing, which of course brings us into the jesters and all that, which doesn't need to get thrown into this conversation. But Michael, I heard you were going to jump forward as well.
Oh yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, of course, there's these changes were noticed by me and everyone else, I think. But I do like it is kind of interesting. Oz Turner, right? They just turn it around. They're flipping, and Oz being the upside down, they kind of just flip the script on him there. It's kind of an interesting play. But I definitely like the character in the book better. I do like the character of Gary Fisher in the book better, and it makes more sense with the numbers as well and the storyline. Uh, so, yeah, we can get to that later, but I'll let you continue. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you guys for adding that in. I mean, definitely the naming of the character is Oz. You know, I noticed that, but I didn't really think too deeply on it. So thank you for bringing that up. The archetype of the Wizard of Oz. The other thing that really, I just, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but in the show, the picture you see here of the 9 on the card, this is what the show presented. Now, in the book, there's this narrative, right, that describes the design, and Madison is actually describing this from the card that Shepard gave her, and she said the symbol looked as if someone had drawn a number 9, then rotated the card a little and drawn another 9, and kept doing that until they came back around to where they started. So the show decided to just put the number 9 by itself in a special font on a black card with white printing. In the book, it was actually drawn by hand on a white card. And these are my two kind of artistic conceptions of her description. If I were on the staff of the show and I was trying to design the card as a prop, this is what I would have come up with and not what they came up with. And I know it's just nitpicky, but honestly, aesthetically, it's just so much better than the number 9.
And we're starting to look at conceptions of the black sun when we start doing this. And if one layered that deeper, you would start to see how that becomes a portal, that becomes a vessel, not a vessel, but a hypnotic device, a hypnotic mandala, if you will. And so I'm glad you put that together. And I thought that was significant, and it's a sad dropping from the book to the series for sure.
Yeah, and I think probably I mean, I can't say for sure. I'm just speculating though that the reason they didn't, I mean, this is what my conception of what the book is saying. So clearly whoever did this knew they weren't following that. And maybe it's the same reason they put Oz in a trailer and made him the way that they made him. They just didn't want to put too much in the show that was too revealing. That was the only thing I could think of. And they changed the card to a black card with a white lettering. You know, just little things like this. I noticed that it made me start thinking, why would, if I worked in Hollywood or for the BBC and I'm working on this show, why wouldn't I try to get something as simple as this, as accurate as I could? Especially aesthetically, it wouldn't be that difficult and it would really pop versus this 9 that they put. And of course, on the books that they use, which I'll get to in a minute, they have that same kind of 9. The side story that I thought was actually interesting, and it turns out it really is kind of integral to the story, and it really goes to show that the author did a lot of research for this book. But the idea of infrasound and Bill Anderson's device, whatever it did, played a role in both the show and the book. But in the book, I think it had a more prominent role, and you got the backstory about one of the Qui Reverti members who had sent him a check trying to get him to stop his research because they didn't want him to create a device that would allow people to see the intruder inside of other people. I thought that could be very dangerous. In the show, Gary Fisher was actually said, there's a scene where you see him sort of spying on Bill before he's murdered, because Shepard, spoiler alert, Shepard murders Bill Anderson to destroy his device and kills his whole family. But Bill Anderson is actually on the run for part of the show in the book until he is eventually killed after speaking to Jack and Gary Fisher. But when Gary is exposed to the machine, this is what, according to the show, allowed him to see the soul of the dead girl. I think her name was Donna. I don't want to keep calling her the dead girl. This is what allowed him to see Donna's soul in his infant daughter, because he had been exposed to Bill Anderson's device. And you get the sense from the show that the effects are permanent or lasting, even after a very, very brief exposure. Of course, in the book, it's never said that he was exposed to the machine, but it is kind of implied that his interest in Bill Anderson and his machine was a bit beyond just curiosity. So there was something to it. And what I liked about the book, though, is that actually when Oz is talking to Shepard at the bar, he actually goes into some of this information. And he said speech developed from prehistoric religious ritual, grew out of chanted sounds. The question is why we were doing this back then, who we were trying to talk to. Also, why, when you look at European Stone Age monuments, it's clear that sound was a major design factor. New Grange, Karnak, Stonehenge itself. The outside faces of the uprights are rough, but the interiors are smooth to channel sound, certain frequencies of sound. And he goes on, read the Syntagma Musicum, Praetorius's ancient catalog of musical instruments. Back in the 16th century, all the major cathedral organs in Europe had 32-foot organ pipes, monsters that produce infrasound, sounds too low for the human ear to even hear. Why, if not for some other effect these frequencies have? Why did people feel so different in church, so connected with something beyond? And why do so many alternative therapies now center on vibration, which is just another way of quantifying sound? And then he says, because the Walls of Jericho story is about sound breaking down not literal walls, but figurative ones, the walls between this place and another. Sound isn't just about hearing, it's about seeing things too. Now, this dialogue was completely removed in the show, but from the Oz character speaking to Shepard at the bar, okay? And I thought it was very significant because of the subject matter that it's dealing with. This is all stuff that, you know, we're talking about ancient cathedrals and their higher technological purposes and why they were designed certain ways, and people are getting more research into sound these days. And I think this is a passage of Bill Anderson speaking to Jack and Gary at the restaurant when they meet right before Shepard shows up to shoot him. He says, infrasound, very low frequency sounds. Most people have been looking at 18 hertz, but I went to 19 hertz. It has effects. Your eyes may water or blur when you're exposed to it. You can get odd sensations in your ears, hyperventilation, muscle tension. A physicist called Vladimir Gavreo actually claimed that infrasound is a key component in urban anxiety. More simply, it just makes you feel like you're afraid. And if you hit the resonant frequency of the human eye, which is right around this point, you can start thinking you're seeing odd things too. everyone's been assuming this is psychological or physiological, but just a side effect of the physics of the eye, but it's not. It's more complicated. Infrasound does strange things to us, very strange things. It enables us to glimpse things we can't normally see. The machine meant you could see ghosts, souls, while they're waiting to come back again. They're all around us. They live in a, trust me, it was a bad machine. No good would have come. So this actually was a part where somebody was saying how, terrible the machine. I think this was Amy was talking to Jack about the machine itself. Well, here's what's really interesting. I actually did some research, and all of the stuff that he put into the dialogue for this character is actually true, and it's coming from real studies. The psychologist Richard Weissman of the University of Hertfordshire suggests that the odd sensations that people attribute to ghosts may be caused by infrasonic vibrations. And then this guy, Vic Tandy, along with Dr. Tony Lawrence at the psychology department, did a paper in 1998 called Ghosts in the Machine in the Journal of the Society for Physical Research. Their research suggested that an infrasonic signal of 19 hertz might be responsible for some ghost sightings. Tandy was working late one night alone in a supposedly haunted laboratory at Warwick when he felt very anxious and could detect a gray blob out of the corner of his eye. When Tandy turned to face the gray blob, there was nothing. The following day, he was working on a fencing foil with the handle held in a vise. Although there was nothing touching it, the blade started to vibrate wildly. Further investigation led Tandy to discover that the extractor fan in the lab was emitting a frequency of 18.98 hertz, very close to the resonant frequency of the eye, given as 18 hertz by NASA. So I just wanted to throw this in here because the author obviously did his research when he included the character of Bill Anderson and this device. I think he's sort of hinting to us about infrasound and vibration itself and its role in the human eye and seeing spirits and such. So yesterday, while I was finishing up these slides, I got an email from a guy that used to live above me in my old apartment. And he's been pestering me since last year about something. He kept asking me if I had any information about the person who lived next door to him in 2019. And he had left his phone number. So I called the guy, and it turns out that he felt like he was under some type of electronic harassment, and that they were using sound and carrier waves to implant voices and other types of annoying sounds into his head, into his ears. And even after he'd moved, he was still experiencing these issues. And so he was speculating that they were using technology that could sort of pinpoint things. And, it was a lot of this targeted individual type stuff I was hearing, even though I don't think he knew that term. So we had an hour and a half conversation. So the synchronicity of this guy out of the blue contacting me about the same kind of thing, well, I just thought was pretty off the charts. So the fact that in the show, it kind of seems like there's no reason for Bill Anderson to even be in this. I think the book does a better job of telling you why it was important. And I really wish the show had included more explanations about the machine and stuff itself. Another thing that the show did that really irritated me was that they very, very briefly showed you scenes of this notebook that Madison is reading, that the Nine gave to her, that I guess Shepard gave to her when he was bringing Marcus through. But in the book, they actually give you the pages from the notebook, which fills in some things about their beliefs. And I'm not going to go through all of this just for the sake of time, but there are some very, very telling things that were in the book that I think they left out of the show. So their cosmological sense of how this stuff works. But they're talking about the act of reincarnating, and escaping this fate of forgetfulness. And then they get into the mathematics of it. So
Eric, I think this is really important information. In fact, I think it's for me, the core of the book and what the series is getting at, the cosmology of this cult, of this secret society, of this process. And I certainly think people would benefit from hearing some of the cosmology here.
sure, yeah, I'll read a little bit of this. And the people looked, and they saw that death sucked, but they assumed this is what God wanted, because our God was a harsh God and hated us. They believed death to be his final punishment. At the end of our short spans of bloody sorrow, that he drops us on this dark and brutal plain to scurry from cold shelter to poor food and back in endless rain, all the while bowed under the knowledge that at some time, at any time, a heel dipped in gore could drop like thunder and smear us broken across the stony ground. We see the people we love taken from us, turn sick and rotten in front of our eyes, and we eat and fuck and dream our feeble lives away, because we understand that this will be our fate too. And that afterward comes an eternity lying silent and blind in a dark, soft cloud. This prospect sugared only by the lies we learned to tell ourselves as soon as we could speak, the promise of an imprisoned life everlasting in the lofty attic of heaven or the basement corridors of hell. But, and here you must listen, the lie is not quite a lie. These places do exist, but close by. People realize this slowly, starting to make plans. Some did, the very few, those who possess the will and strength of purpose, the self-chosen ones, those who learned that the doors to prisons could be unlocked in the night, that we could venture back, and who in time came to realize that they could inhabit the daylight hours too. Become the householder once again, people like us, people like you, my dear. And that was one instance in the book that kind of goes over how they're viewing what's going on. So they're talking about the few, the chosen few, with the will to escape and be able to come back and have their memory and not be trapped in the prison of the vault of heaven or the prison of hell. And so this gets into the numerology a bit here. The 7 ages of man? Of course not. As with everything, there are 9. By 9, we must be rooted, living securely above or below. 18, we may start pulling strings. And just for reference, he's talking about the ages that we hit. So like 9 years old, 18. So every 9 years. 18, we may start pulling strings. By 27, there should be sufficient control to be consistent in aim. At 36, adulthood, true dominance begins. 45, without integration, the crisis point. 54, the age of power. 63, wisdom. At 72, the search starts again. 81, time to leave. We do not die as others do, and so the parting of this place must be under our control. Add the numbers which make up these 9 ages, 3 plus 6 or 7 plus 2, all in turn resolve to a digital root of 9. So it has been enshrined, hidden in plain sight. A triangle equals 180 degrees. 1 plus 8 plus 0 is 9. The square and circle are 360 degrees. 3 plus 6 plus 0 is 9. All regular geometrical shapes have a digital root of 9, even 666. Do I need to tell you by now to add those three numbers and then add them again? This is not an accident. Our mathematics, power of nines, but the nines themselves have become weak in the meantime, spiritualized, have even come to believe in their own cramped version of the lies, to believe that our power must be constrained, that we must enter life as a newborn, must hide in plain sight, just another tree in the forest. But the forests have all been cut down. I will not fall with them. Did Aristotle not say the weak are anxious for justice and equality? The strong pay no heed to either. What happens to those who do not believe as the nines do? Those who dare contradict them? Ah, over those souls, the truly free, then they would make themselves gods, sitting in judgment upon us. St. Thomas Aquinas said, "You must know a soul by its acts. You are free to know me by mine." And Lichtenberg said, "We imagine we are free in our actions, just as in dreaming we deem a place familiar, which we then see doubtless for the first time." I really thought that those two passages were kind of crucial to understanding what the nine actually believe and why they believe it.
Could you go back and look at that last bit? I am what you dream. I watch your back always. I am what guides your hand. Very significant.
Yeah, I couldn't read that last part because my Zoom controls are blocking it out. So thank you for reading that.
It's important. I'm curious, and this is one of the reasons why I was itching so hard to make sure Michael made this, is there's so much number stuff going on in the book and in the series that it's, to turn your head. There's a lot rooted in this.
Yeah, Michael, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, obviously 9 plays a big part in this series and in the story. And I've talked to you guys about my number system already, so we do have that background. But I can go over a few things in regards to 9. So it's IQY because I'm taking numerical values and attributing them to the alphabet. And I, Q, and Y are my 9, so it's 999. And Equi, I is obviously the self, or you can see it as a perceptual, abilities of the self. And I is the self as well. And then QY, I have these in mantra form as well. And Equi is how you pronounce that, the IQY. And Quay is a word that means birth. It's something that comes out of the land to receive something from the water. So it is like the birth. And 9 to me represents birth and ascension and recreation. So I haven't probably shown you guys my magic square that relates to a lot of my number system. But on the outside, you have 17 nines. So imagine a square from 1 to 9 on the side and 1 to 9 on the top. And then you will go across and divide the two together and then get the digital root of that. And in the middle, you'll have 2 and 7 and 7 and 2, which equal 9. So you have this, and 27 is equal to God in this number system. So God would equal 27. And 27 shows up a lot because it's also 3 nines, right? or sorry, and then three, or sorry, 3 times 3 times 3 as well. So, which is the cube, and we can talk about the cube too, and God and black cube. But yeah, so 9 it would be a God number for me, and a number of ascension. And you have obviously the 9, and I don't think you've really mentioned or talked much about the Council of Nine. I'm sure you'll be getting into that, Eric, and the Aeneid. You did mention the Ennead or Aeneid, but they're another group of 9. So you have these, and I always see the Tree of Life with 9 and the one that rules them all, the Keter. So you have these spheres, and the Klepoth are also come into this, but I won't get into that just yet. So looking at
As
intruders, the word.
Not to
Sorry, go
interrupt you,
ahead.
but if you look on the screen, is this yours? I was trying to find. I was
Yeah,
sitting
that's
here
mine.
searching. Okay, I wanted to throw that up there for reference when you talk about your numerological system. That
Yeah,
this is
sweet.
what
That's
Michael
awesome.
is actually using when he's doing this. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, awesome. And so that's just the basic form. But you would have, so J would be an 11, R would be 20. So it does equal 2, but that's the short form. So I use the whole 28 from 1 to 28, and 19 would be, so 10 and 19 are hidden numbers, but yeah, unless I really get into it, it's going to take a bit. I'll just leave that with you guys. So intruders is equal to 139, and this is the 34th prime, which is a twin prime with the 33rd prime, which is 137. And I find this interesting because you have like the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, and beyond that, so probably a 34th, but it would be behind the veil. And to me, that this might be the secret to that, or one of them. There was a lot more I had on well, I won't get into the Bible stuff just because, but it does talk about being the right hand of God, like having the right hand of God within you. And so we have right hand and left hand path too that brings up the Sephiroth and Klipot, or however you pronounce that. I might be butchering it. So that's intruders for me. That also equals 11, right? 1 plus 3 plus 9. Or here, no, it doesn't. It would be a 4 and 9, so it's 13. So you're 4. You're back to 4, which is interesting. That's 4 is Dalit, or the door, or it's the matrix, the digital reality that we live in, or possibly biological, the bi-fi, the scaffolding, so to speak. But if I get into Gary Fisher's numbers as well, you have Gary, and Gary means bold spear, and Fisher is, obviously a reference to the Fisher of Men, like a Christ figure. So I find that an interesting name, and the numbers are interesting that as well. But that's why I liked the book version of Gary Fisher better. It suited this kind of character a little bit more, to be a savior. Also, we're not sure in the book if he, killed his daughter or not. So this could be another torment to him. And then, who knows if he had someone. It seems like everyone, all the characters in this book, could have had a double, another soul, and they kind of suggest that there are 2 souls within an individual. So that's quite interesting. And then Jack, also becoming Jack Shepherd, near the end, but let's talk about Gary Fisher for a sec here. So Gary would be 55, and that's also equal to devil in the number system, but just off the top of my head, which is kind of interesting. You have Fisher, which would be 72, and that would equal 127. And like I said, 27 would be our God number. And we have 127 is the 31st prime. And 2 to the power of 7 minus 1 gives us our 127 encoding there. And Jack is also 27. So this 27 and that equaling 9 is very important. And it is the God number, so those possessed by God. Jack Whelan. So Jack is 27, like I said, and Whelan would be 67, which gives us our 94. And that is significant to me because my birthday is the 94th day of the year, and I know that there's 271 days left in the year, which is our 2, 7, and 1 again coming up. So, and that's April 4th. And, Jack, meaning like God is gracious, and Whelan is actually, it means wolf. And to me, that kind of resonated because you have, I think you guys will remember, so when Marcus is taking over Maddie, he takes her over when she's about to have a bath and kills her cat, Loopy, which just means wolf, right? So you have this killing of the wolf, which is interesting. You have the whole vampire versus werewolf kind of thing coming on, or that's what I'm taking it as. And it's funny that it's a cat as well. So, and you guys will know the cat dog symbolism
The
within my
cat with
system.
9 lives.
Exactly right. You have 9 lives, and then dog is, the same letters as God, and cat and Satan in my system have the same values. CAT is 314, and then Satan would be 31416, which is an approximation of pi. And the circle is 3, which represents the serpent. And so your C, K, and S is the X that represents the serpent's, the sound of the serpent, and the dragon of the earth without wings, the fallen serpent. So, and that, your 139 of intruders is the, from God, to the serpent, to the 9, which is, possibly reincarnation, or the step beyond the veil. So that's pretty interesting to me. Yeah, and so we have the wolf, like the dog and cat, being like Satan being cat, and like I love cats, so nothing against cats. But then you have, so a cat being more, selfish in temperament, dogs giving unconditional love. You have these themes that come out around the cats and dogs as well. And
another thing that you when you bring up Jesus or the Savior within
yeah,
Gary Fisher's archetype, one of the things that Christ was supposedly tortured with was a cat of 9 tails. Is that not correct?
yeah,
I just wanted
that's
to throw that
very
out there.
interesting. I like that.
Ooh, good catch.
Yeah. So we have, like, with cat, and I'll make this a little more clear because I'm not sure I did, but dog would equal 27, the same as God. And your cat or Satan would equal, well, it equals 60, but it's also equal to pi because it's the approximation of pi. And now when we have dog and God, equaling 27, that being a 3 times 3 times 3 cube, and then cat representing the circle, you have the idea of order in the cube. And we try to order our lives in squares and boxes and right angles. And then the circle, which is chaotic in a way, because you're never able to actually calculate it. So you have these two aspects of order and chaos, and pi is never ending. It just keeps going, and it's random, which I think you need both. And this is the idea, like evil and good as well are two sides of the same coin, is what I do think. And you have to have both to play the game, really. But let's get back to
Well, I wanted to add too that when
yeah.
you mentioned the numbers of like the circle and the square, the idea of squaring the circle,
Mhm.
with the circle being 360 degrees, and as they stated in the previous slides, that adds up to 9,
Mhm.
and that if you look at when you the square itself is made up of 90-degree angles totaling, right,
Yeah,
360
absolutely.
degrees. So there's the 9 present in both the square and the circle, and that the chaos of the circle and the order of the square being applied by the angles or the angels, right? And there's actually a group, an occult group called the Order of the Nine Angels, which
Yes.
so I just wanted to add all of that in there.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's sweet. And yeah, totally agree.
And
So
so
And
I'm,
it this all snakes round. I mean, there's more than just the Order of the Nine Angles. There's a lot of stuff when one gets into orders and groups that have 9 in there, and so there's a lot going on when we move into secret societies or this kind of liturgy, and that will leave for people to go down those pathways and explore. But this just lets us know, especially with the spattering idea of what the numbers are, how baked in all this is, how this is, whether it was consciously intentional or not, it's part of the bigger narrative here, that it moves outside of this story. It moves into more of the structure and dynamics of the world around us and what's at play, in my opinion.
yeah, I mean the 9, and I'm gonna get to some of my other slides. I kind of go off away from the show itself, uh with the idea of the 9, the Council of 9, the Ennead. But I wanted to, speaking of Gary Fisher, and thank you, Michael, for actually giving us that numerological breakdown of these characters, and because I think it's going to be relevant. This is the stuff that in the show, Gary jumps off the building with a bunch of files, and you don't really know what was in them. You just assume it was a bunch of madness and nonsense. But this is what was on the thumb drive that he leaves to Jack. And at the end of the book, Jack is going through this thumb drive, and he's reading it, and he's a bit skeptical too, right? He thinks Gary went way too far, and he wanted to just focus on Amy and this small group of people. But clearly Gary was doing his research too. So I thought this was relevant. And he's basically described, this is Gary describing the list of people he thought were intruders: Frank Lloyd Wright, Johann Sebastian Bach, the Wandering Jew, Nikola Tesla, Osiris, vampires, the builders of Stonehenge, Thomas Jefferson, all of the Dalai Lamas, to name but a few. The prophets of the Old Testament, too, with their extraordinary ages, 4, 5, 800 years. Naturally, they didn't live that long as the same person. Gary wrote, it was the same soul returning time and again, different bodies. And I can't read that last line, Nish. You'll have to forgive me. But then they go to the story of Jesus, right? One who on the morning of his birth received 3 visitors bearing gifts, symbolizing the child's experience from previous lives. Gary claimed that the boy's mother was told not that the Holy Ghost would come upon her, as the Bible had it, but that one would come upon her son, the promise of life everlasting, the Lord who is our shepherd, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And so he goes on. He'd spoken then as if he thought the intruders were an isolated phenomenon, a few individuals who'd worked out a way to persist down the generations, a cabal who were different from the rest of us, but he hadn't believed that at all. He wrote that the word nightmare was derived from the Scandinavian legend of Nachtmara, demons who squatted on the chests of sleepers, bad dreams long having been believed to be caused by evil spirits trying to force their way inside. He claimed that the original role of midwives had been to scout for healthy pregnant women whose babies would probably live past infancy, who would make good sites for aging intruders to move into next time around. He noted that nobody knows how antidepressants work and claimed they masked a badly integrated intruder, which was why initial benefits often turned to worse depression or self-harm. Suicide, an unconscious attempt to kill an intruder, the thing roosting inside, conflicting our lives. He believed that this also explained our species' affection for drugs and alcohol, as they dampen the main personality, allowing the intruder some time in the sun, a chance to direct our behavior once in a while. The intruder was less inhibited, more experienced, and simply a different person, and prone to make us behave uncharacteristically. This, presumably, was why Gary had given up drinking and why it said God looks after drunks and small children. It's not God, of course. It's the hidden person inside. The person, Gary believed, inside all of us. Only a small group of these were aware of coming back. To keep the rest of us sane, secure in our identities, we were happy to have the second soul fenced off, gagged, and occluded from our conscious minds. When something leaked through the wall in our head, a piece of deja vu, a dream about somewhere we'd never been, a confused body image, a facility for a foreign language or a musical instrument, the simple feeling that we should be somewhere else and having some other life. We shrugged it away as being merely the human condition, fucked up, fractured, never masters of our own mind. Gary even had a scientific rationale. It was an adaptation, he said, and the real reason humans ruled the world. At some point on the flat, grassy plains of Africa or in the cold mountains of Europe, our species derived evolutionary advantage from being able to support 2 souls within a single body. The modern soul didn't realize, but was able to make intuitive decisions, life-saving, and thus naturally selective calls on the basis of experience gained in the intruding soul's previous lives. But there was a cost. When the souls cooperated, the person worked. When they didn't, the person was damaged, broken, dysfunctional, violent, alcoholic. This is why some of us are mentally ill or bipolar or just can't get our shit together and seems to enter the world like that. The soul goes somewhere for a while. Then it comes back, forcing its way into children, into our babies. Then it waits, consolidating, growing in power until the time is right. Why do we hear nothing about Jesus until he was in his mid-30s? Gary asked. Because that was when the intruder was mature, ready to assume control. Any internal threat to the security of the system was dealt with swiftly, as he claimed Salieri had done with Mozart, when the latter grew disenchanted and worn out and started dropping hints in his work, disguising them as hidden references to Freemasonry. And why had Jesus himself never returned as he had promised? He got lost on the other side, was just another shadow among those who Bill Anderson's machine would have enabled us to glimpse had it not been destroyed. And so I thought that was really relevant in explaining like the suicide of Donna and just suicide in general. I mean, I'm not saying I agree with everything he's saying in this, but the author at least took the time to try to explain Gary's state of mind and the fact that all of this had led him to research and come to these realizations that, you know, he didn't just go crazy and jump off a building and have no clue what the hell was going on. You know, he'd worked out a lot of this stuff. So I wanted to throw that in there because I really felt like I needed to redeem the character of Gary Fisher from the portrayal that the show put him as this sort of cowardly, crazy man.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to add something. It looks like to me that in the beginning there was death could be also saying that you need death to break the dominant personality or the original personality. As you see in the show, Rose Gilchrist, who takes over Amy, Dyer Amy Whalen, kills her baby, or that's, you know, we're going to be giving a lot of spoilers here, so just heads up.
At this point, I don't think anyone's rushing
No,
out to watch the show.
yeah, I think we're good. But with that death, Amy starts to lose control, and then with the death of the cat of Madison, I think that's where it starts to turn as well. You kind of break the personality, break the good, have them step back and retreat. Just a thought to that phrase that's used a lot.
Yeah, in the book, when Marcus is trying to take control and Madison is sort of, I think what's happening, it's not that he's trying to snuff Madison out completely. It's there's an integration that's happening where Madison actually feels like she is Marcus because she is, but Marcus is also Madison. So there is a struggle for like which consciousness or the personality will dominate the physical vessel. And of course, in the show and in the book, Madison wins out because there's a passage in the book, and I didn't include it in my screenshots, but she gets into a car to hitch a ride with a guy, and this is not in the show, which for obvious reasons they probably steered clear of that scene, but it's implied that, you know, there was this guy driving the car was also a pedophile, and that Madison in her own mind was critiquing this person that didn't really know exactly what they were doing. And she spoke about the light that little girls have, and that some people can see it and they know how to use it. And she said if she could go back and do it again, she'd show him how it's done properly, like implying that Marcus and her are integrating more and more as she goes along. And I think killing the cat and murdering and getting her into these situations like where she would get molested in a car for a ride, it's like it's breaking her down in a way. That was, I think, what Marcus's attempt was, to integrate her into him instead of her trying to integrate him into herself. But there's definitely more of a struggle in the book. And I, you know, however it would actually work, I think the author really gave it some good consideration, and he went to some dark places, which, you know, I think was brave of him as an author to do that, right?
We need people to speak clearly like that, and to speak on the darker, sicker things. It's important that we come from the round when we're looking at concepts and the way things play. And one of the things that I found very provocative is this idea of demon integration, and how demons become fully integrated in a possession. Now, this is very specific, and I think a lot of what we're looking at is that same filter, but they don't really go into it. Another thing before we move from that is, if you could revisit that bit on suicide, Eric, I would like to hear that again, actually, just so people can understand that. And I have a comment after you revisit it.
Sure. And just to let you know, Michael had a power outage. Said, "Give me about 5 minutes, and he'll try to come back." So they were having some
Okay.
bad storms. So hopefully he'll come back with us.
Yes. And you could just write that in our personal chat too.
Let's see here. The suicide part.
Yes.
Let's see. There. So he started with the nightmare, and the evil spirit sitting on the chest, and midwives. Let's see. Yeah. So he noted that nobody knows how antidepressants work, and claimed they masked a badly integrated intruder, which was why initial benefits often turned to worse depression or self-harm. And I guess he's saying initial benefits of the antidepressant, and that that actually leads to more self-harm and suicide than it would if you didn't take them. Suicide is an unconscious attempt to kill an intruder, the thing roosting inside, conflicting our lives.
So this is significant to me when we start looking at the idea of demonic integration, when we start to look at the uptick in what's going on in the outer world around us in these modern times, in context to where we are now in 2023, July of 2023. And then also looking at places like Oregon or in Washington now with the MAID system, and in some European countries with assisted legal suicide. And, it could be said that that's being pushed. But I just wanted to drive home that now more than ever, this is another reason why this particular book and series, I think, is more relevant here in 2023 than it was when it was written and when the series came out, because these things are in the mix. They really are, for different reasons. But here's another reason to throw in the mix that is important when we're looking at time jumping, when we're looking at reincarnation, when we're looking at what's being housed in the bodies in other humans, what's being housed, especially when you can look around and see that some people are acting erratically, and big personality changes. Yes, we've gone through a mass trauma event, but that seems to be what it takes for everyone. And this reminds me of the tickers, which are the things that bring the conscious person, the sleeping person back, the tickers, the objects. One thinks of the Inception movie where he could tell where he was in the dream space. These are checkpoints in time and give one context. This is like you listening to a song you haven't heard in ages since you were little, and it takes you right back to that moment, or tasting something you haven't had the sensation or pleasure or distaste of going through again, or a smell. This is a sensory situation to recall that which is lying in wait, that which has been forgotten, that which is there and can be brought forward. So suicide's certainly back in the mix of all this. And I think that for the relevance of the narrative here, one cannot let that slide too far to the periphery.
Yeah. I mean, and they don't really ever address the question of what if a soul doesn't want to come back? If you were to trigger the intruder or the second soul with an object, I mean, I was thinking with the suicide aspect that sometimes if you are triggered to come into consciousness within a body and you don't necessarily want that body or don't want this life again, because whatever you were experiencing wherever you were, I think in the show they sort of imagine the place to be like a mountain and a lake, nature, something quiet, without pain, without death, without decay, without time. And that to for Marcus, he wanted the life because he lusted, he had desire. But sometimes you bring back a soul that didn't want to be brought back. And that could also explain some of the suicide, is that it's just this constant returning or not being able to deal with the integration, having a hard time, like with Bix Beiderbecke in the show. Not so much in the book because they didn't really touch too much on him in the book, but in the show he was really, really struggling, going right back to alcohol, where Rose was trying to save him in a sense, thinking she was helping him, but he brought all of that addiction with him in his consciousness. So it's like these things can follow us beyond death. These things that aren't worked out and worked through in this lifetime can often remain with us and become, like generationally, when you look at alcoholism or drug addiction or just an addiction in general, how it can follow through your bloodline. And it may skip a certain generation, but it's always there until it's dealt with.
I thought that the elaboration on Bix in the series was a wonderful addition because it did bring in these aspects.
Yeah, definitely. And also, this happened to Donna right at the start of the series. You notice that her eyes change, and that's kind of a way that you see that the other has taken over. And then she writes the note saying, "I am not Donna." It's the suicide note, and kills herself in the bath. So this seems to me like that individual soul did not want to come back. And, you also see, we may have touched on this, but it's all in nines, right? It was her 18th birthday, I think. And Marcus was brought back on Madison's 9th. You had the old woman saying, it's my 72 next year. Amy, I'm not sure how old she was, but yeah, interesting, eh?
72 demons.
Yeah, the Goetia.
Mm-hmm.
72 angels in the Enochian system.
Yep, 72 keys. This is a big number. And again, what's I think wonderfully done here is it's not sleazy. It's not thrown in our face. It's just subtle. It's there. So for those of us that know it's there, but it's not overdone.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up because you got your 72 and your 27. So are you possessed by the spirit of God or by a demon spirit? And that's always the question, at least in the Bible.
I brought some of this up, I think, when you were away, Michael, and because the biblical stuff here is just so easy to pull up to, with demons and integration of the process of possession and all this. To me, this is all heavily at play in both the book and the series.
Yeah, absolutely. It
Well,
is. And you have your right hand and left hand, right? Right hand of God. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
I feel like the author did a really great job of integrating a lot of different cosmologies, belief structures into this story. One of the things that I was going to move into next was, the place that the story took place of Seattle and how important that was in the book. Not very much in the show. It could have really taken place anywhere in the show because they didn't seem to focus at all on Seattle, but the book spent a good amount of time going over the history of certain locations and the indigenous people and the history of that land. So I wanted to touch on that, but if you guys wanted to keep going with this, please.
I think we should look at Seattle. For me, that's how I actually found this show again, because it disappeared from where I didn't know what it was, and I just remembered the show. And by looking through the idea of Seattle and TV series, I was able to locate it. Seattle's a major player. It's a character in this book.
And beyond that, I mean, just all of the things that have gone on with Seattle in recent years. Back in 2021, with the police station being taken over and that whole city block area, Seattle is sort of a ground zero for a lot of the targeted individual stuff with the homeless population in Seattle. So it has, obviously Microsoft and Bill Gates and all of those other connections. So I thought it was significant that the story took place in Seattle. And the author could have set this anywhere. I mean, he is actually from England, so why he would choose Seattle, I thought he spent a lot of time in the book talking about it, so I thought it was worth mentioning. And I actually included some pictures here of the place that he talks about. And he says, this city, in what had been far wilderness, a place that certain people would call their own, somewhere that had been special and revered even before they found their way here. On the flight to LA, I had read some of the book on local history that I'd bought only a couple blocks away. I knew that there'd once been a village called, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, but the translation usually given for the name is the little crossing over place. Or I suppose the place where you can cross over from here to somewhere else and perhaps back. And that is the place that he keeps going back to in the book that has the totem pole and the fountain and the statue of Chief Seattle, who, this place plays a prominent role, especially when he meets Amy and the other members of the nine are all gathered around there. And I included some old photographs of early days of this particular spot that he's talking about. Here you can see that square with the totem behind them and all of these men on their motorcycles. He said, I didn't really know, excuse me, I didn't really know what to think. And I sat there in the cold early morning sunshine, not thinking it. I heard a story once about the early settlers of the region. It was told that when Europeans finally landed on the northwestern shores of America, feeling like conquering heroes in a new world, they were disconcerted to find that the locals were not surprised to see them. This was not because unknown white men had forged a route overland from the east, however, but because over the last several generations, the tribes had occasionally seen trading ships far out to sea once every 10, 20, 50 years. They knew these could not be the work of local people, and therefore surmised that some other group of men or beings were on their way, however slowly. And, it was interesting, this whole passage sort of foreshadowing the intruders. And he said, I don't even know whether it's true, but it has stayed with me. The idea of these hazy visitations of inexplicable form, seen from afar, never coming closer, but once seen, impossible to unsee. A first indication that the world held more than had been bargained for, a foreshadowing of events that would be impossible to change, impossible to hurry, impossible to stop. Portents of unknown type and provenance, far out in the mist of the seas, a future held in abeyance, but approaching nonetheless. And that's really kind of like the story of all major cities in America, right? All of these tribal lands that were taken over time, and because they had significance, as Chief Seattle even related. And then, of course, Jack is asking Amy when they're in this park that you're seeing these pictures of. This is where Jack keeps kind of finding himself in this location in the book. He said, "What is it about this place? This square, why does it feel like it does?" And she said, "There are places where the wall is thinner," she said. "This is one of them. That's all." So, I don't know if that's true, but it seems like it's in the lore that the actual location here was known to be a crossing over place where the veil is thinner. And then I found this interesting, that in 1899, a group of businessmen stole a Glinglet totem pole and placed it in Pioneer Place Park, which is the park we're talking about. When an arsonist destroyed the pole in 1938, the city sent the pieces back to the tribe, who carved a new one and gave it to Seattle after finally getting paid for the one that was originally stolen. I know in the book, he did also make a mention that the pole that they stole was not carved, that was an addition by the white settlers that they carved, that the tribes themselves didn't actually carve poles like this. So I found that interesting too. Then they added this wrought iron pagoda, and it was originally known as a comfort station and highly touted in tourism marketing. And they put a bust of Chief Seattle in the park in 1909. Right? There's your nines again. 1899, 1909. So, and then he had this quote from Chief Seattle in the book. "At night, when the streets of your cities and villages shall be silent, and you think them deserted, they will throng with the returning hosts that once filled and still love this beautiful land. The white man will never be alone. Let him be just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not altogether powerless." And this is from his 1854 speech. And then there's a picture of him. I don't know how old he was in this photograph, maybe 100 or approaching 100 years old. This is his daughter, Kikusoblu, Princess Angeline, as she was known, at her house near that same location. And here's Seattle today, right? How it's grown, how it's changed. These are, reading the book, you really do get a sense, because they talk about the market. They talk about this park and the specific area where the building was at, that the Qui Reverti had their headquarters in, is all in this one little section of Seattle. You can see the old railway car, and they even, putting the native profile on the seal, the corporate seal, right? Corporatizing and putting their stamp on top of the native land and the tradition. So I did find it interesting that Seattle had made treaties with people and kept his people out of certain wars that had happened. But there was a rival tribe that was much more warlike. So he chose to deal more as a diplomat, and had a longhouse, one of the biggest longhouses of any tribe in North America, with this tribe. So Seattle was a significant part of this, and I'm glad that he did the research, because the place that the character goes to so often, being this crossing over place, I thought was significant to the story and kind of opened up a new angle on it. So whatever, you guys have any thoughts on that? I know, Nish, I know you do.
Well, I got mine out really, and just for the, trying to move it forward a little, I'll omit, but I think that we covered it, and it is a very important aspect of the story, as I said earlier, and one that I felt we do need to recognize here. There's so much, and I will say personally, I love Seattle, the look of Seattle. I love the location. I've lived around there. But for me, I never felt comfortable, and it always does feel a little bit thin there, the veil. And I'm saying this from my psychic senses, that I always felt there was a lot going on, much like San Francisco and some other cities I have lived in. So I'll yield to Michael.
Yeah, I love Seattle as well. I've been quite a few times and really love the feeling. It's also a port city, right? And if we're talking about metaphor and reality, um, that's where there'd be a birth, right? You have the port, and if you get into the maritime law and all this, we've all three of us know, like Maxwell's work, Jordan Maxwell's, and I do feel like um, port cities are definitely a little closer. Like the veil is definitely thinner there. It does feel different. I do love that feeling though. And yeah, and this can get into birth and shepherds and all that, and I'd like to get into that, but I'll let you
Yes.
continue.
I just have one caveat here, and I forgot, and you just brought it up, Michael, is remember Seattle's the home of being Shanghaied and then Portland. So that idea of being Shanghaied, which was being taken from one life to another, so usually into indentured servitude. And that's a whole different story, but that is one people should understand is actually woven into this narrative, whether intentionally or not. And I did not lose sight of that the whole time.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's built into the theme, not necessarily a major component of the plot, but all of these themes are kind of there, right? Just underneath the surface, just waiting to be scratched. And I know we're getting up close. This is going to be a monster of a show, but so I'll quickly kind of move through some of this other stuff, this tangential stuff, especially with in the book, he actually sees graffiti on one of the overpasses that says Rev 9. And it immediately made me think about Revolution Number 9, the Beatles song. And then so I came across some interesting stuff with the Beatles and the number 9. And they first played on the 9th of February, 1961, and their future manager, Brian Epstein, came across them 9 months later on the 9th of November. And then it keeps going on. I'm gonna move to John Lennon though, because he's the one that actually admitted having this thing with 9. His first wife, Cynthia's birthday was the reverse of John's, as she was born on September 10th, and the 9th of October, so 10/9, 9/10. And then he married Yoko and lived for a time on West 72nd Street. So there's the 72 in the Dakota building, was number 72. Like the bus he used to catch in Liverpool. Their son, Sean, shares his birthday with his father, born on 9/10, 1975. In 1969, John legally changed his name to John Ono Lennon. Yeah, there's 9 O's in the combined names. The Lennon song Number 9 Dream, which supposedly came to him in a dream with no specific meaning. It was his 9th solo album, issued in the 9th month of the year, peaked at number 9. there's more and more of this stuff. What he was murdered on 8th of December in the US, but it was the 9th of December in the UK. He went to Roosevelt Hospital on 9th Avenue. He revealed shortly before his death that numerologically, apparently I'm a number 6 or a 3 or something, but it's all part of 9. Whether the number 9 was fated for John or not is speculative. However, he was acutely aware that the number played a large and recurring part in his incredible life. John, his music, ideas, and impact on the world. So the reason I brought this up is because of these characters in the story that keep coming back. That 9 actually, especially in the show, they make it a point that they're always staying in a room that has 9 on it, or in front of a sign that's like the 9 ball, right? There was a lot of 9 symbolism in the show. And here he is with iconic glasses, and he wore these orange tinted spectacles while composing his song Imagine on his Steinway piano. So in the show, there's these objects that trigger someone to return. And of course, these glasses have like a story to them. And they are now in a museum along with the piano that he played just before he was shot and killed. So the piano and the glasses probably being 2 of the things that may be used as triggers for John Lennon, right? And one of the earliest Beatles songs was One After 909, which John wrote while living in his grandfather's house. And then you get to the song Revolution number 9. It featured a series of tape loops. I mean, most people hated the song. It was just noise, but it was this experimental thing. And he said it was an unconscious picture of what I actually think will happen when it happens, just like a drawing of a revolution. So something that's relevant to today, and the idea of reincarnation is the idea of revolution, or the turning over and the changing of power, the changing of the guards. And we see this happening, right now in our reality. And so this whole thing with him and the number 9, I'm going to skip through most of this stuff, but it mentions Manson and the Book of Revelation and all of these other connections, which I think, like Charles Manson and the murders and the Marcus character and the Lennon character, Lennon being obsessed with the number 9, I thought were all kind of relevant, and it led me down this sort of path. And some of his influences, these composers, experimental composers, also have interesting backstories and connections. So I threw that in there. So then there's the Egyptian Ennead, which is a group of 9 deities in Egyptian mythology worshipped at Heliopolis. The sun god Atum, his children Shu and Tefnut, their children Geb and Nut, and their children Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. And Ennead sometimes includes Horus the Elder, an ancient form of the falcon god, not the son of Osiris and Isis. In the show, I actually clipped this. There's Jack standing in front of the bookstore called Ennead Bookstore, looking at his book, which is for sale, with a picture of him as a cop. So certainly the directors were playing on the idea of the Ennead and the 9, right? Which is important, because not only that, but the Greeks had their own council of 9 with Prometheus pissing off Zeus, and then Zeus creating this council of 9 with Aphrodite, Apollo, Athena, Demeter, Hephaestus, Hera, Hermes, Poseidon. And then, they created Pandora and sent her as a gift to Epimetheus. And Epimetheus was also given the box and told never to open it. But Pandora, out of curiosity, did. We all know what happened. So I thought that was an interesting connection. There's some other council of 9s in the Church of Satan. That is the council that governs the church. In the role-playing game Mage: The Ascension, the Council of Nine is the highest authority of the traditions. And all of these other references are basically telling you that the council is in some way in charge of governing or controlling, right? Which is a theme that keeps occurring whenever that Council of Nine theme is used. Something else that I thought was
Also, I just wanted to
oh, go ahead.
jump in here because there's also the connection with the Council of Nine and X-Files and Chris Carter, and the creator of this series also wrote for X-Files. So
Yes, that is
just throwing
correct.
that in too.
Yes, thank you. I had forgotten about that. That Chris Carter was involved with this show. Um, Millie Bobby Brown was born on 2/19, so February 19th, 2004. So when she was filming the show, Intruders, playing Madison, a 9-year-old girl, she was 9. And then when she was in Stranger Things, when it began filming, she was 11 and played 11 in the show. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and everything that Stranger Things was about and what that was sort of based around. Then you get into this guy who shares the same birthday as her, February 19th, Andrea Puharich, who, if you guys don't know, is a medical and parapsychological researcher, medical inventor, physician, and author, known as the person who brought Israeli Uri Geller and Peter Hurkos to the United States for scientific investigation. And I'll kind of skip through this, but he had a place up in Maine called Lab 9 on his estate. And, or no, I guess it was in Austining, New York. Yeah, but it was called Lab 9. And this is where he had conducted some experiments. And he brought Hindu mystic D.G. Vinod to one of his channeling sessions. And during the experiment, Vinod went into a trance and claimed to have contacted a group of entities calling themselves the Nine, or the Council of Nine. And some of this is all just transcripts of the stuff that he was channeling, but the Nine, or the Council of Nine, has played a huge role in a lot of the New Age esoteric communities, and a lot of pretty big names have been into this stuff. Puharich, it's speculated that he was in the CIA, that the CIA was using this as part of a lot of the MK Ultra experimentation, which is what we see a lot of in the themes of Stranger Things and the character of 11, right? And the psychokinesis. This is stuff Puharich was working on with Uri Geller and several other people, and channeling this 9 who actually claimed to be the Ennead. So that's why I thought of this and why it connected to the show, that they actually referenced the Ennead and the 9 as being sort of these Egyptian deities. And I'll kind of skip through a lot of this for time, but this is a very fascinating rabbit hole to go down if you have the time, because there's a lot of people connected to him and to a lot, like Sidney Gottlieb, Uri Geller, Bobby Horn, Ira Einhorn as another associate of his. So there's actually a book called The Council of Nine: Briefing from Deep Space by Stuart Holroyd. He's another British author who was involved with the later formation, because Puharich died in 95, but this still continues to this day. Gene Roddenberry was involved with it like in the mid 70s and produced a screenplay for a movie about the 9, but I guess it never got made. But he did work a lot of the concepts into early Star Trek movies, The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. So a lot of this stuff is just sort of, it led to so many different places, but I just couldn't include it all just because of time. So anyway, that's the end of my slides.
Those are
Oh,
awesome,
wow.
man.
Yeah, that was very impressive. And I didn't realize we came to the end of your slides.
I felt like they'd never end there.
So I guess, Michael, do you want to jump in? And I know that you'd mentioned earlier there was stuff you wanted to uh, bring to light here. And this, I think, is the time to do that.
Yeah, so just wanted to touch on the shepherds as well. I don't know if you guys mentioned anything. Sorry, you lost me there. My power went out, so, and I'm not on a laptop, so it doesn't have a battery. So I had to restart everything. But so the shepherds in the show, right? You have Richard Shepherd and Frank Shepherd, or who are the first two shepherds we meet that bring back whoever it was inside Donna. And just for a numerological standpoint, Shepherd equals 88, which I'm sure you guys will recognize as a like time travel psychopomp number. 8 and 8 being like transformation and consuming, like eating, changing energy from one state to another. So that I found that very interesting and fitting. Also, Richard Shepherd. Richard would be 65 plus 88 would be 153, and this number is really significant to me and my magic square as well, because it's 9 times 17, and on the outside of the square you'll have 17 nines, which are the right side of the boat. And in the Gospel of John, the third appearance of Jesus after his resurrection, they saw him on land and they were on a fishing boat and they couldn't catch any fish. And one of them, I'm not sure who, I can't remember if it was James or anyway, they heard the voice of Jesus to throw the net over the right side of the boat, and they caught 153 fish, and it's very specific about this. So it was this miracle. And then you have the whole fish symbolism and 9, like I find that very interesting. Also, you have a 17, so 153 is a triangular number with 17 levels, like a pyramid with 17 levels. And your 153 also gives you the ratio of the Vesica Pisces, which, is our fish symbol too. So all this is very interesting to me. And the shepherds being psychopomps, bringing people back, to life, basically, resurrecting them. And then through that death, you have a rebirth of a new soul within a body. So that's, if you guys want to jump in on the idea of the shepherd. Also, you have Jack turning into a shepherd at the end of the series there.
Yes.
And yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just find that super significant, and what a profound way to end it. But also 9 months to give birth.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, there's a 9 is definitely a birth number to me. And as I was saying, like Koi or Q, it's spelled Q-U-A-Y, and QY are the 9s, right? IQY, and the mantra Ikwe, and Kwe means birth. So it's just 9 is full of birth numbers and ascension and the spiral out, and 6 being a spiral in. And I've talked about this with you guys before, but yeah, very interesting. And also shepherd. So Jack would be 27 and then 88. So I'm not sure how I feel about Jack being a shepherd. I think it's really interesting because he is like the wolf, right? I feel like Richard shepherd wanted to allow all humans to return, right? He didn't want it just to be for the elite and those of the nine to decide. So this was kind of maybe his way of bringing Jack into the fold to topple the house of cards, so to speak.
Well, in the show, it's maybe implied that he may take him up on the offer, and probably because they wanted a second season. But in the book, it's clear Jack actually kills Shepard and then steals his $1 million that's in the back of his car and takes off. So
Yeah, he
it's
becomes the shepherd. He becomes Richard, the new shepherd, is what I take from that. Because he also mentions he doesn't know if that was the plan for him, originally, and what soul is inside him that could be coming forth
and he's
and being
lost
shepherded.
everything. He lost his wife, who turned into Rose. I mean, he's no longer a cop. He's not even really a writer. So he's faced with this decision of like, who am I really? What am I actually doing with this life? And given all the information and knowledge that he'd gained about this stuff, it just seemed fitting that he would take over, killing the shepherd to become the new shepherd.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rose, like Rose Gilchrist, she might be the next one in line, right? They talk about who's the next Joseph Cranfield, right? I think he was kind of the head of the nine at the time of this series, and he was reaching his, I'm guessing 81st birthday, because that's when they find a new body. But Rose being like Gilchrist, right? Christ's servant, Rosie Cross, you have it all there. Very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of Rosicrucian cosmology overlays in the show, and the naming and the symbolism. I mean, I would be surprised if there wasn't somebody that worked. Well, the author himself, I'm sure, has connections, but people that worked on the show as well. It's clear that there is an understanding of certain occult traditions and things. So, I mean, even though I thought the show was a bit cheesy, I really loved the book, more so than a lot of fiction books I'd read in recent times. So I was really glad that you suggested this, Nish. It was a great exercise and project to work on.
Well, I'm wondering, so with the ending of it and the lack of the series showing the contents of the book and what was going on with all that, I wanted more. I wanted to read the book. I wanted my hands on one of those copies. I wanted to see where all that is more deeply rooted. Now we can extrapolate because all the pieces are there to extrapolate from. And for me, and I think for anyone, you two and others that may be listening, a lot of this stuff shares commonalities with stuff we're aware of in the world, and stuff that's come to light through different mediums, such as the open internet when we had it in the past, and we could find old tomes and old archives, and this became a real treasure hunt for a lot of us when things began to open up. Now, of course, there's a firewall on all that now, and stuff's being rewritten and hidden and banned again. But the bigger thing here is that there's something deeper in this narrative. And that's, of course, where I became very interested. And the way both the book and the series left off, I I was left wanting more and unfulfilled because I want to know more about their practice. I want to know more about how they do it. I wanted to know more structure of the processing and the movement. And like, I think it was you, Mike, who brought it up. It may have, it doesn't matter. We don't know how they were able to locate where the old soul was. Like, what was the process here? So we extrapolated by doing the Buddha game and all this other stuff, but what's going on with that? And there are movies out in the world that suggest, I can't remember the movie right now with the eyes, that we have a signature. Certainly Jupiter ascending brings this idea in a specific signature when it comes together, allows those with the ability to see the signature to hone in and say, this is that person, etc. And so it brings into light for me the idea of awakenings ultimately, because in the beginning there is death, and in the end there is no end. This is also like, in the end there is life, eternal life. And what is eternal life? What is immortality? What are these things? As we're moving deeper into the digital age, one of the forerunners for everything going on in our culture, of course, is transhumanism. This is the modern form of transhumanism. And we see how this has changed shape from the coffin text to where we are now, and how folkish stuff, folkish rituals, digging up the dead and parading them once a year in some cultures, burning hell notes in China, in the I think, is that the Shinto? It's Chinese burning hell notes and burning effigies of clothing and stuff the dead may need. And celebrating over the graves, as people do all over the world. And of course, the great Mexican cultural experience of honoring their dead, which is so beautiful and moving. And by doing this, we're keeping them alive on one level. But as Peter Mark Adams got into in the game of Saturn with the Solobushka tech, Terachi, there's this idea of specific movements, specific geometry, specific placement to facilitate this in a more scientifically accurate way, that there is a pathway from death to life, that there is a canal from the womb to the threshold, that not only are these factors connected, but there is a movement around us that pushes us, propels us, just like when we are being birthed. The mother is there helping us. She's pushing when we need it and then breaking. And it moves us through the process of birth. It's an alone, solitary experience, and yet it's not, because we are connected to that which we are coming through, that mother energy that feels like us but is not us. And it feels almost autonomic, and yet the mother's laboring on one end, the child is laboring on another end. These are different worlds. These are different realms. And there's a lot to be said for this idea. And when we are penetrating the unseen by just looking at narrative, by questioning our reality, we are actually looking into it, and it is interacting with us. The idea of Oz is still really funny because I think of Seattle in a way as the Emerald City. Now, I know other people have different ideas of the Emerald City, but for me, it's always been part of how I view Seattle. And I don't know where that came from, but still, it's a man controlling technology. What's going on here? Birth, our biological bodies, our physiology is a technology. And consciously allowing ourselves to move into something that is more willful, like traveling a bloodline in that canoe down the river of a bloodline, and seeking to re-amalgamate, to surface again and again, consciously. The idea that the memories that we get wiped, or the past you has emotionality to it, is one aspect of it, but does it have to be? Can it be something wispy like a book you read? Does it have to be a hard memory? Do we have to relive pains and sorrows? Now, there's the epigenetics that go into all this that say and suggest this kind of thing could be at work as well. And just like the inheritance of what we're working with, we are the inheritance of our bloodlines. We are the expression, the fruit of the eternal mycelium, of the roots below. And therefore, we have an iteration. Rose, a label for a state of mind. A person's life is a state of mind. And a state of mind is something to think about, because a lot of times it's stripped away from the idea of soul or spirit. Mind is another state of being. In fact, it's one of the several states of being. It could be labeled into a sensory state as well. I mean, that's not far-fetched for me. And so if we can, as Jung thought about, change consciousness at will, and if we pull into the idea that time is actually a manipulation of our experience, and we change consciousness, which means shifting from one state of consciousness to another by the act of will, by will alone. So going from, I don't know, Rose to Amy, etc., or tricking it back from Rose to Amy to the iteration before that and an iteration before that, there starts to be a real yellow brick road, if you will, that moves us into deeper territory, that yields something luminous and magical. And that, I think, becomes the core of what all this is about. There's a lot of idea wrapped into this when we see the negative aspects. So we see bad seeds coming through and doing bad things again. And one immediately thinks of bloodlines with that too. Overlords, kind of vampiric types or ghoulish types feeding on those around them and securing their own bloodline to continue, much like we were talking about earlier. Species, we can consider the Japanese beetle invasive, or kudzu, or English ivy. But in a well-balanced system, they're not. They're in balance. So it starts to beg the question of our own personal lives here. the state of mind of Eric, the state of mind of Michael, the state of mind of Nish. And when we find unbalance or ill at ease, when we find something is out of place, and therefore something that lodges, that creates a space for something else to come in, which may or may not be good for the whole organism, for the whole state of mind, it changes everything. What if that thing is parasitical from the outside? What if that thing is not from the bloodline, but what if that's an intruder of another kind? And this brings in that concept of intruders as aliens or demons. And the idea that there could be a flip side, as I'm talking about here, that this is a Janus situation, that there is a coin and there are two sides to it. Because after all, we are in a realm of duality. And in this duality, we have to consider the balancing factors of it. We can see that in our outer worlds, the collective around us is out of balance right now. We can see how the pendulum swings from side to side if we step back and take bigger looks, longer looks towards the past, even your own past. And so this series brought up a lot of stuff for me that felt very magical, that feels very relevant. And also the idea of overlords versus the folk. This is very much at line here because we have a council of 9. We have a council, period, that's a secret council that makes decisions secretly. Well, that becomes the realm of conspiracies. And we had Oz on the case, this big conspiracy, but the big conspiracy is bigger than anyone could know because it becomes the story of you and I and mankind, the world around us. So for me, having gone through the book and the series together in tandem was a wonderful experience. And I'm just glad to have been able to throw some of these ideas out here with y'all because this is a provocative situation going on in our world and therefore in our arts and in our culture.
Well, I, for one, would love a sequel or another book. Just like you, I want this story to continue. I wasn't satisfied with how it ended. I was left wanting more. And certainly the themes presented in the book are things that I've been thinking about, reading about, contemplating in my own life. The ideas of being able to leave this body and move into another body or another area of existence with my memory, with my consciousness coherent, meaning I feel like there is a way for you to accomplish this, but this is not something that anyone, not something everyone is doing every day. Most people are not going to be conscious of this and directing the process. But I loved having both of you here. Michael, did you have any final thoughts as we wrap this up for today?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. So, I really enjoyed this. Thank you guys for inviting me into this. I will say, like, I feel that coming back with your memories, I touched on this a little bit at the start, but to me, I see it as some kind of game where we're having an experience, and to know of previous experiences might not be helpful or may just make it's like using a game genie, I'm coming in with all the codes already. I already know everything. And there's less wonder and mystery in that for me than going through it with questions. And this brought up a lot of questions, the series, and mystery. And that's what I love about life. So I'm happy not remembering, coming back. If we even come back here, there's probably countless other realities and simulations, whatever, however you want to view it, with different with a different kind of physics, with different laws that you can experience. I do kind of take the approaches like if there is ever a simulated reality that is as real as the one we are experiencing now, that would mean there must be millions of them. And as I said before, how do you know you're in the real one? Is there a real one? Is it all simulated? These are questions I don't have answers for, but I find very fascinating to ponder. With the shepherds and the way that they may or may not be able to hear the other side, I see them as psychopomps with this 88 symbology behind them. So, and they also described the voices of the dead being at 19 hertz, which is 1 hertz less than the human ear is capable of hearing. But that might not be the case for everyone, and maybe there's a trigger. And that may be how the shepherds are able to shepherd souls by actually hearing them and investigating, finding them. That's kind of the leap that I made. Whether it's true or not, who knows? But or true in this story or in reality, not sure. But interesting and cool to think about. Yeah, I just found this really interesting and love doing this with you guys. Thanks for having me. And yeah, hopefully we'll do another one.
I'm sure that we will. And yeah, thank you guys for both embracing the mystery. I like that, Michael. There are times where I feel like I don't want to remember. I do love the mystery of this life, and it's one of the things that kind of gets me out of bed in the morning and drives me every day, is just to explore more of the mystery. And sometimes I wonder what would happen if I solved every mystery. I think things would get really, really boring and tedious. So I'm with you. I There's parts of me that wants the answers, but another part of me doesn't want to actually answer those questions. I want to keep the mystery alive. And I thank both of you for coming here and doing that. I don't think we actually got to any sort of concrete resolution or answers, but exploring these themes and ideas, I just love this stuff. So thank you both for being here, and I look forward to our next one, whenever that may be.
Yes, this has been a deep pleasure, and I think your last word there was telling for this series and book. We don't really get to concrete answers. It's like it was all a cliffhanger in the end, and so it leaves us with more mystery, and that is also one of my things as well. I think we all share that love of the mystery, and I have a feeling that behind each mystery is at least another, if not a million, right? And so let the mysteries continue, and let people like us continue to enjoy them as they unfold, dark or light. This is, I think, one of the reasons for the gift of consciousness, whatever that is.
Well, I want to wish both of you a happy new moon. I'm getting ready to go out and have my new moon fire, celebrate the new moon in Cancer. So I wish you both the best, and I will speak to both of you pretty soon, I'm sure. But you guys take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone that listened.
Yes, whoever sat through all 3 hours of this, I want to shake your hand. Just kidding.
Yeah, thank you.
But with that, I will wrap this up and say Thank you for listening. Thank you for entertaining us. It was definitely fun.